It's 11 o'clock, so we're going to get started here. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Deborah Rinio, and I'm going to talk to you about my book and how you can engage your elementary learners in STEAM activities in the library. So if you have any questions while I'm talking, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then I'm going to try and make this a little more interactive towards the end, give you not only opportunity to ask questions, but an opportunity to think about this, how you can apply STEAM in your library and in your classroom. So we'll talk a little bit more as a group towards the end, but if you have any questions as I'm talking, go ahead and type them in the chat, and I'll try to respond to them as I see them. If I don't get to your question right away, I will get to it at the end. So once again, welcome, and thanks for joining me today. Over the next hour, I'm going to share with you some of the inspiration, the purpose, and the strategies that are presented in my recently released book, STEAM Activities in 30 Minutes for Elementary Learners. I plan to talk for about half of the time and then guide you through how you might apply these ideas in your own space. First, I want to tell you who I am. I'm Dr. Deborah Rinio. I'm a professor for the Library Media Certificate Program at Montana State University. I live and work at my home from Alaska, so I do online work all the time. That's my everyday thing. Before I started working for Montana State, I was a school librarian in elementary, middle, and high school libraries in Fairbanks, Alaska. I've also worked in public and academic libraries. And I served on the editorial board that wrote the National School Library Standards, which is the most recent edition of the school library standards. So let me tell you a little bit about the book and the inspiration behind STEAM in 30 Minutes for Elementary Learners. First of all, you might be asking yourself, why STEAM in the library? Well, if you don't already know, STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics. But it's more than just each of these components. It's those components blended together in an interdisciplinary approach. So learners are using art to solve math problems, and engineering and math to solve science problems, and technology to express their artistic and scientific ideas. There's a true blending of these different areas, not done individually and separately, but done together. Art provides a medium by which learners can visually and concretely process what might otherwise be abstract scientific knowledge. There are a variety of skills used by both scientists and artists that are not often taught explicitly in K-12 science instruction. These include the ability to draw on curiosity, to observe and accurately express one's observations, to construct meaning from one's observations, to work effectively with others, to think spatially, and to think kinesthetically. STEAM facilitates this explicit instruction around these areas in a way that interests and engages learners while engaging them in the inquiry process as well. STEAM also helps learners develop problem-solving skills. And it's helpful that when we think about problem solving, because we use problem solving in every aspect of our lives, to think about the two main types that we engage with, the convergent and divergent. And both of these are present in STEAM, all the STEAM fields, and in many other aspects of our world, and are part of the research and inquiry process that we engage in the library. In convergent thinking, there's piecing together of various pieces of information to arrive at a single correct answer. Convergent thinking is the type of problem solving that we engage in when we're testing or calculating, and there are defined outcomes. Looking for the wavelength of a particular frequency, for example, would be a convergent test. Divergent thinking is when you aren't looking for a specific answer, when there's multiple possible answers. So trying to design a bridge, you may have a test to determine which is going to be your strongest material, but you're also going to have design considerations and usage considerations that don't have specific defined answers and defined outcomes. Most elementary school libraries operate on a fixed schedule. There's very little transition time to set up supplies or to clean up between groups. You might have 5 minutes at most to transition between a 4th grade class and then a kindergarten class and then a 2nd grade class. What learners can do, both physically and developmentally and academically in each of those different age groups, can vary vastly. With only 30 minutes of instructional time in many libraries, how can you present quality instruction for your learners? So I was at a conference that was all about STEAM in the library, and we were talking about this idea, and somebody raised that question, how do you do this with just 30 minutes? What do you do? And so we started talking as a group, and the idea of scaffolding arose. This idea is about taking an essential understanding and designing an activity for one grade level, and then changing that slightly to become more complex or less complex for higher or lower grade levels. It's much easier to take one activity and modify it slightly for each of your group of learners than it is to prep a completely different thing for every group. It makes it easier to transition between classes because you just have to set up one thing. And I thought to myself, I've done things like that before. I bet that make a great book. And that was how the idea was born. Now the book, and even this concept of scaffolded lesson plans, which I'll get into a little bit more here in a minute, isn't going to solve all your lesson plan problems or all your STEAM problems in any way whatsoever, but it is a starting point. It's a way to think about it that helps facilitate all those issues that can crop up with time management in the library. So the book itself has a couple core components that make it unique. First, each activity is aligned to three sets of standards: the National School Library Standards, of course, the Next Generation Science Standards, because this is STEAM focused, and the National Core Arts Standards. This helps to ensure STEAM integration, that's really that interdisciplinary approach, and also presents a perfect opportunity for collaboration with classroom teachers, STEAM or STEM specialists in your building, or art specialists. Anyone who is interested in these ideas as well, perfect collaboration opportunities here. Now, like I said, the activities are designed to be completed in 30 minutes to meet the needs of a busy elementary school librarian. Each activity is scaffolded for grade bands K2, 3-4, and 5-6, with the idea that it engages learners in the same activity but at greater levels of complexity. So you can gather all your learning materials together and teach the same activity to all your K-6 classes so that everybody can get engaged in inquiry-based hands-on learning with minimal cleanup and setup between each class. The book also includes technology extensions, collaboration and growth mindset tips, suggested picture books, and sample assessments. So everything can be adapted to the needs of your classroom, your library, your school community, and learners are working on their inquiry and exploration skills, even in these short chunks of time. There are 14 activities in the book, and I'll give you an example of one, and I'll kind of talk about a few of the others, but they're divided into two main sections: thinking like a scientist and thinking like an engineer. Thinking like a scientist activities are designed to get students thinking about inquiry from a testable hypothesis perspective. So one of the activities, for example, is making a tissue box guitar, exploring sound, where learners take an empty tissue box and they wrap rubber bands around it and pluck the rubber bands to explore sound. How do different widths of rubber bands, and really the thick ones and the skinny ones and longer ones and shorter ones, how do they all make different sounds? And the more the older students are asked to try and build a guitar in this sense that they are lining up the rubber bands, their strings, quote unquote, in order so that they're changing from pitch, from lowest to highest pitch. So that's a very testable hypothesis sort of idea. How can I make this happen? How can I test this? There's some design element there too, but it's mostly that testable hypothesis, science-based exploration. Thinking like an engineer activities are more about the design process, more about the iterative design process specifically. For example, one of the activities is building a Rube Goldberg machine, which is an engineering challenge, and ask them to apply their knowledge of simple machines, which they're introduced to in the lesson, to build a simple Rube Goldberg machine, which is a chain reaction machine. So how do I build a bunch of things together, you know, like a series of dominoes that knocks into a ball that rolls across the room and hits something else? How do I make that happen to do a specific action? They could work together in groups, work together as a class, and explore not only how did they build that, but how do you adapt to when something doesn't work? When it doesn't do what you expected it to do, you have to change something and try a different approach. And how do you use your scientific knowledge to make those decisions? So with the scaffolding of those activities, all of the learners are doing those same things. They're all building a Rube Goldberg machine. But of course, with the K through 2 students, it's going to be a much simpler machine. And they might be doing it as a whole class. With the older students, 5th and 6th grade learners, they might be doing a more complex machine or being asked to think about more complex topics. Instead of just building it, they might be asked to identify the type of simple machine that they're using in order to make that machine work. So they're going to each do a slightly different thing, but with the same materials. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, those don't sound like particularly unique activities. I've seen those done before. Maybe you've done them yourself before, and that's fine. The point of the book wasn't to give you completely new activities to learn. And in fact, it's easier if you have done some of these things before because you have an idea of how they work. It's more about how to scaffold inquiry-based learning, even in the busiest library, to make STEAM learning and hands-on inquiry a reality in that short period of time. So that's why there's not just the activities in the book, but there's also 2 additional sections. Part 1 is all about STEAM and about applying a growth mindset, because that's really critical to the inquiry process. Why should you care about growth mindset? What does the research say? What are the basic ideas you can apply with your learners? Part 2 is the activities themselves. And the third part is about making STEAM work for you. How do you write your own scaffolded lessons? How do you deal with collaboration with your colleagues? Because we know we can't all do it on our own. Our learners need support from all of us, and will do better academically when they're working with the same concepts in different ways from multiple educators. And a chapter also on assessing learners' work in the library. Because just because you're not assigning a grade most of the time doesn't mean that assessment isn't important. So one of the foundational aspects of the book and where the book starts, that sort of initial first chapter, is all about growth mindset. The problem solving involved in the inquiry process can be frustrating. Inquiry is not a linear path. It isn't point A to point B. There are twists and turns as learners encounter new information, as they make predictions, as they engage in research, and as they communicate their information. At each stage of the process, they might twist back on a section. It's represented often as a circle, sometimes as a line, but really it's this sort of winding path that can double back at various places along the way. That can be frustrating for a learner who isn't familiar with that process, who doesn't know what to do when something doesn't work the first time. So to engage effectively, a learner has to be curious, persistent, tenacious, and willing to view that failure as a learning opportunity, not as a reflection of their character or their skills or their talents. But unfortunately, many students view their mistakes and their failures as personal failings and challenges, things that feel difficult, as a reflection that they're not smart or they just can't do it. Fortunately, though, educators can help learners develop a growth mindset. There is evidence, research-based evidence that that is true. And having a growth mindset helps learners to see those mistakes as opportunities for growth and setbacks as just a pause toward the future success. It's helpful to think of a growth mindset as a continuum. People that trend toward a fixed mindset on the one end of the continuum believe that their basic abilities, including their intelligence and their talents, are predetermined traits. They can't be changed. And those that trend toward a growth mindset, on the other hand, believe that their abilities can be enhanced through learning and practice. And they recognize that although there are limits to each person's capabilities, everyone can improve their abilities. A growth mindset is oriented towards learning. It promotes perseverance, resilience, and challenge seeking. In studies, they've shown that a student who has a fixed mindset, when they make a mistake on an exam or quiz or assessment, and they get that grade back, they view it as a failure. They don't want to try again. They don't want to try to improve their work. A student who has a growth mindset is much more willing to ask, how do I fix this? How do I improve it? Regardless of what the grade policy is in the class or whether a teacher accepts revisions or not. They're much more willing to ask for help because they realize that that's part of the learning process. Whereas somebody with a fixed mindset is not going to be likely to reach out and ask for help regardless of what's going on in the situation. So as educators, we can help build that growth mindset in our learners by doing a few different things. One of those things that we can do is thoughtful praise. And that's really focusing the way that we give praise on expended effort rather than talent of the learner. So instead of saying you're smart, a growth-minded educator might say, you worked really hard. You're expanding on their effort, not on whether they did something right or wrong. Not, that's great, but what did they do well here? They appreciate their perseverance, appreciate the specific aspect of their design. The other thing you can do is teach your learners about how the brain functions. Understanding the brain and how the brain changes with learning, how neurons in the brain form new connections and stretch themselves when you learn something new, how practice helps reinforce those things, will help the learners understand that this basic concept, that working hard on something is part of that process of getting smarter. Real world examples are also really important. We often provide examples, and I think as society we're getting better at this, but you'll see examples of inventors and scientists and artists and athletes who have done amazing things. And a lot of time we only see the amazing thing they've done at the end and not the journey they took to get to that point. But we can provide real examples of people who are passionate about their subject and their work, and they got to where they are today through hard work and persistence. But they had setbacks, that things didn't go perfectly for them, but they dealt with adversity, and they were able to come through that. Mathematicians, engineers, artists, everybody have to go through those things to become successful. And by showing our learners the process that's involved in that, how you can bounce back after failure, they're much more likely to be able to face those challenges head on. And there are books, suggested picture books throughout the STEAM book that demonstrate some of those things. And the last strategy in the book, and that I'll talk about today, is meaningful feedback. And this is about making sure learners know that you are there to help them, and that new content, new strategies are something that everyone can master with time and with help, and as well as their own individual effort. Now, at only 30 minutes, a learner can only dig in so far to a topic, an inquiry project, or a design challenge. So it's best to view that sort of 30-minute time as a teaser when it comes to STEAM or hands-on. Of course, you can take a lesson and you can break it up over multiple weeks, assuming that you see your class once a week, or maybe once every 10 days or something like that. You could break it up. You could do a longer term project over a series of weeks, but learners tend to lose momentum when you extend something over too long of a period of time. So I find the easiest way to approach STEAM in the library is really to think of it as a teaser and to use that as an opportunity to collaborate with other educators in the building. If a classroom teacher can do the STEAM activity in the library and you can extend the learning from there, or you can do the STEAM activity in the library and they can extend the learning, those are great opportunities. If not, though, if that isn't a reality in your space, or if that just doesn't work out, they're still offering them an opportunity to engage in hands-on inquiry-based learning. Even in these small little chunks, they can sort of develop their inquiry muscles, develop their growth mindset brain in short bursts. Now, I've been talking about the contents of the book so far, like they only apply to school librarians, but the activities really can be done in any elementary classroom. So if you like this idea, if you get the book and you like the book, share it with your STEM-inspired elementary colleagues, because it's really for any educator. But it was designed for that sort of 30-minute library chunk. So let me give you an example of one of the activities. I'll kind of walk through the parts and pieces of it as an example. And we can talk a little bit about best practice and how you can do your own scaffolded lesson. So today, the lesson I'm going to kind of walk through is called Designing a Thermos, Exploring Heat. And each activity in all 14 activities in the book are divided into the domains from the standards: think, create, share, and grow. So for the think piece, this starts with remembering the story of the three bears. Talking about heat, we're talking about insulation. So you ask your learners to think about how each bowl of porridge was a different temperature. Why might that have been? So they're going to come up with lots of different ideas, right? And you want to kind of guide them to the idea that maybe the bowl itself made an impact in that. And they're going to do an experiment to see if that is possible. How the bowl or how the container that something's in might affect its heat. And so you're going to introduce them to this idea of an insulator, depending on what grade their level they are and whether they've been introduced to that term or not, or remind them what an insulator is, which is something that keeps material from changing temperature. It's going to keep warm things warm and cool things cool. And of course, you'll want to ask them to identify insulators they're familiar with, things like coats and mittens and hats and coolers and thermoses and stuff like that we use in our daily lives to keep warm things warm and cool things cool. So in this particular activity, they're going to try to keep a cup of hot water warm as long as possible. And for my example, what I used rice, cotton balls, and beans as the three insulators. But this can be done with any set of materials. You want some that are going to be a little bit lighter and fluffier, and some that are going to be denser, so you have a comparison. But really, any material will do, whatever you have at hand. And that's another thing with the book, is that all of the supplies that are requested or required for the activities are all things that can be easily acquired and are very cheap, and that most likely can be donated by yourself or parents or community members to help support the STEAM activities. So in this particular one, it's again rice, beans, cotton balls, those types of things, cups, foil, and a thermometer. And I just used my thermometer from home. You don't need a fancier thermometer for this sort of thing. We don't need to get too technical to help students kind of introduce this idea of inquiry in the library. So For K through 2 learners, what I did is I divided them up into groups and had each group build a thermos with a different insulator. And each learner had a role, so within each group. So one would be the cup handler, one would be the insulator handler, one would be the data recorder, and so on. So everybody has something to do, and each group is doing something. And then they would compare their results, and we would talk about it as a class. For 3rd and 4th grade learners, each group would build each of the 3 different thermoses, or you could do 4, or you could do 2. One of the beauties of any sort of lesson is that it should be adaptable to what you have available to you, what you have time for, and so on. So again, the activities are a starting point, adapted as need fit. So we did 3. I think the book suggests 4 actually, but do what works for you. And so each group would build a set of thermoses, and then again at the end sort of compare. For 5th and 6th grade learners, because at this point they should really be starting to get into more complex work, they should not only each do their own experiment, but they should design their own experiment. Ask them to think and show them the basic concept, and then give them 15 minutes even. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. To try and brainstorm an experiment. Talk about variables and, what is a variable and how do you set up an experiment so everything's the same except that one variable. And you don't need to get too crazy with it at that grade level with this point, depending on what their prior experience is. You could measure the water, so each cup has the exact same amount in it, but we just eyeballed it, and that's fine for that grade level with these groups. Depending on your learner, the background of your learners. I was working with a population with a wide range of big itinerant population, a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds, and students who had a lot of different experiences prior to coming to work in our school. So when I was doing these activities with our learners, I tried to keep it as simple as possible. But if your learners are more advanced, if they've been doing more STEM, rely on that. They won't need more time necessarily if they have the past experience with that. So the 5th and 6th graders design the experiment and then you've helped facilitate it. And so to build each thermos, we just put a little insulator tin at the bottom, put a small cup inside of the bigger cup, and then filled in around it with the more insulation. And you can probably see in that picture some of my inside cups were a little wonky, but that's okay. We just used what we had. And you can use smaller cups, use what you have at hand. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's about giving them the opportunity to think about these ideas. So then we added the hot water and covered each with foil and poked that thermometer through to measure the temperature, and of course measured a starting temperature, and then we waited 10 minutes and measured the temperature again, but you can start to see the change after even 5 minutes, so you can do it earlier as well. And then we had them write down their results. This was my notes for my example here, and then shared that on the board and talked about, they made predictions beforehand, so were their predictions correct? Why or why not? Why do they think they got the results they did? And so this is the opportunity to start talking about how the air quantity impacts the insulation value. Now, you don't have to be a scientist or a mathematician or an engineer to understand, to be able to do these activities with your learners. One of the things I did for each activity is added a science background for educators piece. So if you're like, I don't really know anything about insulators, there's a page in there before the activity itself that explains the basic science that's going on. So you have the vocabulary to use with your learners when it comes to doing these specific activities in the book. But the learners are going to do these activities, are going to share the results and talk about it a little bit as much as time allows to do that. And earlier, I talked about growth mindset, right? And so in each activity in the book, there's a growth mindset tip in there. Just a little reminder of, as you're going through the activity, what do you say to learners when they get frustrated? You know, those 5th and 6th grade learners who are designing their own experiments. What do you say to them when they're like, I don't know what to do? You know, and so there might be a reminder in there about, like, ask open-ended questions of your learners to encourage, to get them thinking, or remind them that they're not, if they don't complete this today, it doesn't matter. That it's all about what they can learn in the time that they have. And that's another thing too, is that it's really helpful with any sort of hands-on STEAM to be really flexible about the approach, and what you can get done and what you can't. So these are 30 minutes when everything in the world goes perfect. But of course, that's not our everyday. So I've definitely done activities where we got through half of what I expected we do, other times where they were done 10 minutes early. And so, as with anything in the educational world, we have to be flexible. But specifically with STEAM, it's important to let the learners know that they don't have to, it's not about finishing it, it's about what do we learn while we're here together. Each activity in the book also has a technology integration piece that can be done in conjunction with the main activity if time allows, or more likely as a separate lesson. Depending on how, if you have a longer period of time, you can do them all together. If you don't, then you can do the technology piece later. You could perhaps do the hands-on portion 1 week, and then when learners come back in the next week, you could take what you did the first week and apply the technology piece the second week. So for example, with the thermos, designing a thermos lesson, the technology piece has them graphing their data and then talking about, you know, what do those graphs mean and what do I see in those graphs? So you might get through having them design the experiment and do the experiment and write down that data, and then the next week you might get to the graphing and sharing and that piece of it. All of the technology integration pieces in the book are designed to use Google Sheets, and the explanations and directions are all surrounded around Google Sheets so that it's device agnostic, so that anyone can follow the directions no matter what. They have an iPad or a Mac or a PC or one computer or 10 computers or 30 computers at their disposal. The technology pieces can be done individually in small groups or as a whole class, depending on the learner availability of devices, their time, and so on. So for the, like I said, for the thermos one, they use Google Sheets to record their data and graph the results. But they'll learn a different Google Sheets skill in each activity. So graphing it's not graphing every time. Sometimes it's conditional formatting. Sometimes it's copying and pasting, where you can shift, like rotate. You copy and paste and rotate something. There's all kinds of different little tricks and tips they'll learn in there. And if you would rather use Excel, you can. The instructions will be slightly different with Excel, but they're usually pretty similar. And as I said before, each lesson has a suggested picture book, or most of them have 3 or 4 suggested picture books with them, some of them just 1 or 2. And then they all have conversation starters, questions to help you guide learners through the discussion about the science that they're learning, or the ideas behind growth mindset, or iterative design process. So if you have longer periods with your learners, if you have an hour and a half lessons, you can read the picture books and then do the activity. Alternatively, you can read the book 1 week, do the activity the second week, or again, this whole collaboration piece, right? You can teach them, you can have the classroom teacher read the book before they come to the library, and then they do the hands-on activity in the library, or vice versa. You read the book and then they do the hands-on piece in the classroom. So there's so many different opportunities and ideas and ways to approach it. So I want to talk a little bit about the approach I took here and how you can write your own lesson plans. And it's nothing, it's not terribly complicated. It's really just about thinking about that scaffolding idea. So each lesson begins with an essential question. What do you want learners to know? So one of the One of the lessons is about friction. It's called Fast Surfaces, Experimenting with Friction. And the intent for that was for learners to understand the nature of friction and how friction can vary between different substances. So very basic, essential understanding. And then determine what the learning task is going to be. What will learners do to demonstrate that they understand the essential question? Essentially, what is their assessment going to be? Obviously, you can do a worksheet or a quiz, but that's not very exciting. Doesn't get them into inquiry very well. So you want to make sure that you are using things that are going to help them develop those standards-based skills from the National School Library Standards and the Next Generation Science Standards as well, and using inquiry-based approach. Get them to explore, to design, to experiment. And write the learning plan. So the steps that the educator and the learner will go through during the lesson or activity. Now at this stage, it's best to just pick one grade level or one grade band, perhaps first and second combined or something like that, to write for and compose a lesson plan for that specific group of learners. As you write, you'll make sure that your learners are engaging in that inquiry or project-based learning. You can give yourself reminders about growth mindset tips, about how you might collaborate with other educators there as well. And make sure you're giving them opportunities to challenge themselves. If you give them an activity or experiment where the answer is already known, where either they already know the answer or where there is only one answer that there can be, then that doesn't work very well. So like for the design a thermos thing, right? If you give them like 10 different materials and let them pick the 3 that they want to test with, because then you're not deciding that cotton balls is going to be the best insulator. You're letting them say, well, what do I think of all these materials that I have available at my disposal? What do I think is going to be the best insulator? Yes, there's a right answer, but you aren't defining what that right answer is. You're letting them figure it out and why it's the right answer. And then once you've written that basic lesson plan, scaffold the plan. So how do you scale it up or scale it down for each grade band? Obviously, you're going to make things more complex for older learners. You're going to want them to engage in more advanced concepts. You want to think about, when you're talking about science and design, about adding more complexity to what you're asking them to do, or thinking about more elements in their design. So another example from the book is the Building a Lego Tower challenge. For the 3rd and 4th grade learners, they build a tower that has to withstand an earthquake, which is just shaking their desk. And then for the 5th and 6th grade learners, they have to add the complexity of working with a budget. So they have to just say, okay, for each Lego piece I put on here, it's going to cost me, 10 fake cents, and I only have $1 or something like that. So how do I build when I need to build within the design constraint that has been imposed on me, which in this case is budget. So you want to add those elements of complexity to get them thinking about more pieces of the design process. Design is not just about building something, it's about building something within the real world constraints that are imposed on us, whether it's the materials we have access to, or the time we have to build it, or the money we have to build it, or engineers are asked to build something based on somebody else's needs, but also on their aesthetic desires. They might have to think about lighting or about access, things like that. So how do they incorporate those ideas? You can add those pieces as you grow up in grade level. And always remember to be open to revision and figure out what works and what doesn't, and have a growth mindset yourself. Things aren't going to necessarily work the first time, maybe not even the second time. And it's okay to continue to tweak and change. Each group of learners is going to be different. I had done activities with a group of 4th graders, worked perfectly. The next year, the next group of 4th graders it was a big flop. And it might have had to do with that moment of time. It might have had to do with that cohort of students. There's so many different things. And so you have to know your learners, but you also have to be willing to be kind to yourself and know that not everything is going to work perfectly or work the first time, but reflect and figure out what you can take away from that experience. And as I said several times already before, don't forget to look for opportunities for collaboration. When educators work together, they share their knowledge and resources to both directly and indirectly improve learners' growth. So collaboration is, I can talk about collaboration for hours, but I want to get to questions and stuff. So I'll just say that the research has shown that it significantly impacts student achievement. And if there are educators in your building who you already collaborate with, look for opportunities to work with them. But if not, then think about collaborating strategically with people who are well connected in your building. If you have a teacher that everybody likes and everybody wants to work with that person, because they're going to be the one who's going to be more likely to spread the word about the great things that you're doing in your space and the great things that you can do for other teachers in the building. So like I said, I want to get to questions. I want to possibly have an opportunity to walk through another example of how this might work. And so there is a chapter on collaboration in the book, and it kind of goes into more details here. But let's try it. Let's give it a try. So I haven't seen any questions pop up on the chat. Hopefully it's working, and there's silence there. If you have any questions, now's a great time to share them. Also, if you have an activity that you would like to do in the library, or maybe something you've done before, and you would like to try scaffolding it, thinking about this idea of that, it would be, I think as a group, we could sort of talk about that and figure out how we might, how that might work. So is any brave soul out there willing to share their idea? And we could kind of brainstorm it. You're welcome to type it in the chat, or I think you can unmute yourself as well. Or if you have questions, you can do that also. Make sure if you are trying to type in the chat that you select the option to send it to everybody, so we can all see. Not seeing anything. Oh, there's something coming. So Melissa says, we made sleds from various materials that I threw out there, and the kids loved it, but it'd be nice to scaffold it. So great. So what grade level were you doing that with, Melissa, and how you just threw stuff out there and had them build sleds? What do you mean by a sled? You can unmute yourself too. And just tell us.
I work in a public library, so it was all ages. And I had like popsicle sticks and cotton balls and paper and various things, and I used a table and put it at an angle. So I put one leg up on the folding table but not the other, and I gave them all a small stuffed animal and told them to try and make one that the stuffed animal could stay on. So they had to think about seat belts and things. but it was typically more for the older kids, and it would have been nice to scaffold it down to some of the younger ones as well.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for sharing. So I would say the first thing I would do is ask yourself what do you want them to learn from that? So like, to me, that I think about friction. That's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind is what are they, but it could be more of an iterative design challenge too. But it, you know, for me, I think about friction, and I think about like maybe for the younger kids, instead of making a sled that has different design components like seatbelts and stuff like that, I might just ask them to, you know, try building a simple sled, and then, you know, send it down a felt space, send it down the blank table, send it down one with maybe like one of those rubber mat kind of materials on it. Like, how do those different things, and then they can think about like, well, what could they do to their sled to make it work better on these different materials. And then the older students can add those additional design components to it to make it more complex and to involve more design process. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's great.
Thanks. So another question here is, Emily asks, do you have advice for how to enable collaboration on STEAM activities through Zoom platforms for distance learning? So yeah, I haven't been doing this a lot myself, but I've been thinking about it. I wrote a little bit about it in Knowledge Quest. So there's a couple things you can do, because I do teach online, but with adults, not kids. So my experiences are a little bit different. But the things that I've had in the back of my mind are that is the first thing is to provide them the instructions for the activity, have them do it on their own. A lot of the ones in the book with, you know, adults, either can be done either completely on their own or with adult supervision. Obviously, they need an adult to help them gather the materials and stuff. But you know, except for the ones like that involve hot water and stuff like that, most of them can be done without an adult necessarily. And have them do the activity on their own, and then bring their results to the group. So they get together on Zoom and talk about them. And the example I gave in the article I wrote was about, there's one about patterns. They take a small wooden block that has strings on it, and they basically are painting the strings and then stamping the results onto a page. And they're taking the block and then they're rotating it 90 degrees and stamping it, and then rotating it and stamping it. So they're creating this pattern. And so what you can do is have them all share their art, the art they created, and then talk about the pattern. What's the same about the patterns? What's different about the patterns? How are they all patterns? And even just that is a simple way to do that. Another option is if you can set up your camera in a way where you can show what you're doing on the screen, is you can literally do the activity. And I actually thought about doing that for this webinar, but my camera is on my laptop, and it just, for me, it doesn't quite work. But for a webcam, you could set it up to sort of point down at your table. So it's sort of showing your hands, and you can, you know, build like a Rube Goldberg machine as a group, you know, show them all the different parts and pieces and say, you know, what should we do? What problem should we solve? Should we, you know, close this book, or flip this light switch, or, you know, press this button, or whatever. And then, you know, I have all the different materials you would have at their disposal, all the possibilities for flipping things. Like, you might have dominoes, you might have a lever, you might have, you know, one of those doorstop blocks for a slope. You know, there's all kinds of different things you can put together. And then as a group, have them collaborate to try different things. They make suggestion, you try it, you talk about why did it work, why did it not work, and then you try the next thing. Not quite as engaging as them doing it themselves hands-on, but it gives the opportunity for you all to work together and to try these different things. So I think there are definitely ways to sort of make that happen, either through that sort of demonstration approach or through the having them try it on their own and then come to the group and share what they did, how it worked, because you can learn from each other just through talking about their data and their results and their observations of each other's work as well, especially when it comes to design challenges. Any other questions, or if anyone would even just like to share their own STEAM experiences and maybe what worked, what didn't, that would be great too. So Laura asks, do you have any suggestions for activities that require minimal materials that all participants could likely gather from home? So I think a lot of the ones in the book are like that. I mean, the book was written to specifically use materials that are easy to obtain. So, you know, almost any of them in the book can be done. You may not have everything in the house, but should at least be able to obtain everything in the house. But I'm just gonna like quickly look through my list here. I think the tissue box guitar one is one that almost anybody is gonna. You have a tissue box. Almost everybody has tissue box in their house and has rubber bands. So I think like that would be a really, really easy one to do at home. Doesn't require doesn't require you to go buy anything necessarily. There's a States of Matter one with crayons where you melt crayon shavings. So most families with elementary school learners are going to have crayons on hand and paper. And you can melt them with either an iron, or which would obviously need adult supervision, but still you can melt them with an iron or with a hair dryer if it gets hot enough. So that would be one that also would be easy to do at home. And then the Lego like building challenges. Most people have some sort of Legos or building blocks. You can even technically do that kind of thing with connect-a-sets or not connect-a-sets, like Lincoln Logs, that kind of thing. Anything that sort of involves stacking things on top of each other, you can do those too. Yeah, paper. Yes, I've done those with index cards, with different pieces of paper, even newspapers. There's the marshmallow challenge. I don't know if you've heard that, but you have marshmallow and then you use sticks like toothpicks or skewers to build up that. I mean, there's so many, almost anything you can use to build a tower. So if you don't have Legos, you can use other things, other things like that as well. So those are a couple that are super easy to do with home at home supplies. Somebody asked about posting a link to the book, and that is a great idea because I did not do that. So let me pull it up real quick here, and I will share that. While I'm pulling that up, are there any other questions? Again, feel free to unmute yourself to ask or type it in the chat. All right, so I just put the link to the book in the chat from the ALA store. And if you're an ALA member, you get a few bucks off, and I believe Amazon has it as well, but that is it. All right, well, we just have a couple more minutes. If there's no more questions, I'll just remind everybody that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to inquiry or to STEAM, and that the whole point of the book is to give you a starting point for quality inquiry-based activities that get students to explore, to engage with the standards, get them thinking, and get them active in the library too. The library is, of course, reading and research and whatever, but it's not just about those things that we explore through hands-on, that we help facilitate growth mindset. And STEAM is just one great, really fun way to get them doing those different things in the library. So thank you all for attending today. It was nice to quote unquote see you all. And feel free to email me. I'll put my, my first slide back up real quick with my email address if you have any questions. And thank you again.